4th level of learning, Paper 8, The Orion and the Artemis Myth, The Real Story of Isis and Genetic Manipulation, by Penre Publications. Written on Thursday, October 31, 2013. Edited by Professor Bob Stannard. Introduction to the Orion and Artemis Myth. The Orion and Artemis story is these days related to Greek and Roman mythology, but the story itself is much more ancient. I am telling this story to the readers because it's highly relevant to Gaia's history, and what really happened here on Earth after Prince Ninurta and most of his team managed to escape from the trap, which Lucifer tried to close after the Titan War. As usual, much of the evidence lies in our old mythology, which is nothing more and nothing less than allegories of what truly happened. The scribes, especially those who were real historians and wanted to preserve the history for coming generations, found themselves living under a regime of a controlling god force, which wouldn't allow them to tell the true story. Hence, the truth had to be hidden in allegories, metaphors, and sometimes in pure fairy tales. Still, it was written in such a way that those who wanted to know would find the truth in these mythological stories. Artemis was, in Greek mythology, the most widely venerated of the ancient deities, and her Roman counterpart is Diana. Some scholars believe that Artemis is another name for Mother Goddess herself, an idea that was actually pre-Greek. We can see Artemis and Diana both being equated to the goddess in many references throughout time, and if we read the story and interpret it, we can quite clearly see that this must be the case. In mythology, Artemis and Orion were hunting partners, and they were good friends. Some say that they even loved each other. Both Artemis and Orion are often depicted with arrow and bow, as a symbol for being hunters. The myth says regarding Artemis, her symbols included the golden bow and arrow, the hunting dog, the stag, and the moon. Then, if we research Orion, we find that he is a great hunter as well, and he is often seen carrying a sword or a bow and arrow, being an archer. So, it is becoming obvious that the bow and arrow are associated with the constellation of Orion, hence, the Orion Empire. Also, I showed in paper 2, that Prince Enlil and Prince Ninurta are one and the same. So, lo and behold, what do we often see Ninurta carrying? Exactly, the arrow and bow. This proves that Enlil, as we know him from Sicyon, and most other sources, did not come from Sirius but from the Orion Empire. This is a schoolbook example of how important it is to look into mythology to understand our history, and in this case, to understand where the different gods originate from. I would like to start by telling the Orion and Artemis story from a mythological standpoint, so that afterward I can show the reader who is who in this story, and who does what to whom, and why. I will refer to references that the original storyteller wanted you to see, but perhaps not those who were, and still are, in charge of this planet. This is why it can be of importance sometimes that the researchers are not scholars, or have a PhD in any of the subjects that may relate to ancient mythology or alternative history, etc., because as such, there is a great chance that they may already have been led to think in certain terms, which have been set by the establishment as the norm. Usually, it's better to start without any indoctrination and look with a totally open mind. How otherwise would we be able to find our way out of the maze of information out there, information that also was manipulated by the very same men of power who history is supposed to reveal? The original, ethical scribes, however, obviously took this into consideration, and perhaps, but I don't know, they counted on ordinary people to find the way. The mythological version of the story. Orion was Artemis's hunting champion, and they became the best of friends. Still, they never copulated, hence, they had no offspring. Apollo noticed the close friendship between Orion and Artemis, and instantly became jealous. Therefore, he created a scorpion in order to kill Orion. Orion jumped into the water and tried to swim away from the scorpion, which was very determined to sting Orion. While this was ongoing, Apollo hurried over to Artemis and told her that there was a man who had raped one of her priestesses. Artemis got furious and asked Apollo who this criminal man was, and Apollo pointed at Orion, who was swimming in the water. Artemis had no idea that Orion was actually swimming for his life from the poisonous scorpion, which Apollo said after him. Instead, she thought he tried to escape his fate after having been exposed for his crime. Artemis, in her fury and sadness over how her best of friends could commit this horrible crime to one of her own priestesses, grabbed her bow, set an arrow to its string, aimed, and shot it at the swimming Orion, who was fatally wounded and died. Here it is uncertain whether he actually died from both Artemis's arrow and the sting from the scorpion or solely from the arrow. Afterward, when Artemis confronted the priestess, who was pointed out by Apollo to be the one who was raped by Orion, she found out that it was all a lie, and Orion had never raped her. Artemis became inconsolable and ran out in the water, trying to revive her old friend and hunting partner, to no avail. Orion was dead. In her grief, Artemis then flung his body into the sky, and he became the constellation of Orion. Then she flung the scorpion, Apollo's murderous creation, into the sky as well, landing at Orion's heel and thus became the constellation of Scorpio. Interpretation of the story. On the surface, this is a story of jealousy, but the real meaning goes deeper than that. This is carefully revealing the characters of certain gods, and it's more about betrayal, manipulation, and power. This story is told in a few different versions, depending on which scholar you are asking, but when push comes to shove, it seems like most of them agree with the story I relayed here. I agree with these scholars as well because it fits right into the story I have been trying to tell in 4 different series of papers. Artemis, as we already have discussed, is the goddess herself, but who then is Orion? Well, first, the story is very careful to point out that the goddess and Orion did not have a sexual relationship. So, could Orion perhaps be Enlil? Hypothetically, he could. In fact, although the Khan and the Queen are considered married from a human perspective, they do not have sex like we do. The Queen, indeed, does not even need a partner in that respect because if she wants to give birth to a son, she keeps her egg unfertilized, but if she wants a daughter, she fertilizes the egg herself, from being androgynous in nature. Although Enlil could be Orion, I am confident he isn't. What we need to do is to look, not only at the mythos again, but also at other sources because Orion's origins has been quite well covered up. A source that is perhaps not used as often as it should, are the ancient tarot cards, which also relate to different gods, asterisms, and very ancient stories. In this one, Orion is correctly equated to Ninurta, Prince Enlil. The first image's detail of Ninurta, Orion, standing next to a lion, sacred animal of Inanna, and symbol of Sirius. Second image, the complete picture from the ancient Sumerian seal of Adda. Third, is of Ninurta enthroned with image of double-headed eagle. Fourth, Orion and Canis major detail from cylinder seal. Further details at end. Unfortunately, this website does not present the images that are referred to, but we can still point out a few quite interesting correlations between Ninurta and Orion. In the first image, Ninurta, Orion, is related to Sirius via the lion, although the lion is not necessarily connected to Sirius, but more so to Orion. The reference to Inanna and Sirius is correct, here showing Ninurta's connection to Inanna more than to Sirius itself. Inanna, however, does have Sirian connections, which we will discuss later. The reference in image 3, to a double-headed eagle, on the other hand, is a direct reference to Orion, and consequently, so is image 4. As a side note, while we're still on the tarot website, It also gives a relatively correct reference to the vastness of the Orion Empire. Orion is one of the oldest known constellations. The bands of Orion refer to the three apparently equally spaced stars that form the belt of Orion, an easily identifiable locational aid. Followed north they lead the eye to Aldebaran, south to Sirius. Two bright stars of calendrical and navigational importances, directional and seasonal markers. Above to the right is the constellation of Taurus, to the left, Gemini. The constellation was thought of as a cosmic giant. His arms extended measure half the skies, his stride no less. This is quite interesting because as we can see, there were many ways by which the ancients hid the truth in plain sight, for those who have eyes to see, and ears to hear, as the saying goes. Here it is done through the tarot cards. However, in the end, the mythos tells it all. If we research Ninurta, we will find that he is the god of the hunt, and Artemis is the goddess of the hunt. They were not lovers, in fact, they were mother and son, whose relationship is becoming distorted by a third party, Apollo. Because this story has different versions, wherein one of them, Apollo as being the liar and traitor, I chose him only to show the readers that he goes under many epithets. Another being with even more epithets, as it seems, is Zeus. Apollo's and Zeus' relation to each other is a curious and interesting one. Indeed, most records indicate that Apollo is the son of Zeus. Thus far, most scholars agree. However, that seems to be where the agreement ends. The question is, who is Zeus? Well, I showed clearly in paper 2 that one of Lord Enki's aliases is Zeus, and I believe that is proven beyond a reasonable doubt. So, if Apollo is the son of Zeus, who then is Apollo? The reader may have figured that out now. Yes, Apollo is an alias for Lord Marduk. I know there are researchers who embrace Apollo as the good guy, so before anyone begins to associate too much with such research, it's best to think twice about who such a researcher is promoting and start looking for motives that may be counter-survival to mankind. I don't mean to say that everybody who promotes Apollo as being the good guy is intentionally spreading disinformation, but it's disinformation, nonetheless. In the above version of the Artemis story, the traitor and the liar is no one other than Lord Marduk. But, I also said that there are other versions of the story as well, and in some of them, it wasn't Apollo, but Zeus, who sent the scorpion on Orion. Either way, father and son may both be guilty of that crime. If Enki was involved, which I see as a very high possibility, he lied to, and betrayed, both this mother, Artemis, and his brother, Ninurta. Mind you that many of these mythos are either analogies or metaphors. Prince Ninurta was, of course, never killed. He is still alive today, as are Enki and Marduk, but the story is telling us about the general characters of the beings involved and that some are willing to go as far as murdering their own family in order to gain power that they don't have, except when they steal it from others. Ladies of Fire. The above interesting mythological story brings us directly to the biblical Garden of Eden and what actually happened there. We have another quite illuminating myth, showing us precisely what happened in Eden. But first, let us see how Enki managed to break into Prince Ninurta's abandoned mountain paradise, the real Garden of Eden here on Earth. Enki was frustrated because he couldn't break the spell and the magic which stopped any intruder from entering Eden from the outside. Regardless of how much he tried, it was beyond his ability. Here was something that his mother apparently hadn't taught him, and that made him even more frustrated. There was only one thing to do. He sat guards around the places where 4 rivers wriggled their way in between the high mountain sides. These rivers seemed to be the only entrances to whatever was beyond these inaccessible mountains. He put some of his most trustworthy military men to guard what looked like 4 entrances, and these guards had orders to contact him immediately if something out of the ordinary occurred. When something eventually did occur, Enki just happened to be close by and hurried over as quickly as he could. It was dusk and hard to see, but one of the guards pointed him in the right direction. No one knew how it happened or where they came from, but perhaps 500 yards away, about a dozen female beings had suddenly become visible by the riverbed, outside the mountains. Enki could hear them laugh, and it seemed like they were gathering something from the ground in baskets that they were carrying. It was hard to see. Enki grabbed a pair of binoculars with night vision to get a better view. What he saw were 12 tall and beautiful females with long, red hair. None of them were wearing any clothes, and Enki was absolutely stunned by their beauty. He couldn't take his eyes away from them and immediately felt the urge to mate with them. He was wondering how many more of these females were on the other side of the mountains and whether there were any males there. He highly doubted that there were any males because he recognized androgyny when he saw it. Still, that wouldn't have to stop him from having sex with them. Without scaring them away, he needed to determine either how to approach them or follow them back the same way they came. Something told him, however, that if he did the latter, he would not be allowed to enter, the females would disappear, and he would lose his opportunity. The women suddenly stopped and looked up at the moon. They pointed at it and said something which Enki couldn't hear. He, too, looked, noticing it was a full moon. In fact, it looked much bigger back in these days because it was closer to the earth. This allowed beings, animals, and plants to be larger in size, and taller than they are today. Not until after the flood, 11,500 BC, did Enki move the moon away so that it became more distant. The moon has a lot to do with locking us into this particular frequency band in which the AIF can control us. Figure 4. The magic entrance to Ninurta's mountain paradise, the Garden of Eden. Enki recognized the pattern of these women. They were shamans. They had the power to put up the veil around their domains because of their shamanic abilities, he thought. They were women of fire. Enki suddenly got even more excited, but this time it was not only sexual, he could really use these women. A few minutes later, the females were gone, as if they were disappearing in thin air, but Enki let them go without interfering. Now he knew, and he had plans. He told his men that they didn't need to be on watch anymore, and he'll take over from there. The story of Isis. Before we continue with what Enki did next and the exposure of his grand plan, we need to go back in time, before Marduk was even born, because it's common knowledge that at least Marduk was involved in manipulating records, and I would add Enki, as well. We can expect that much of the distortion is related to these two beings. This is certainly the case. Most records say that Marduk was the son of Enki, Ea and Damkina. Then, if we start researching Damkina, it won't take long until we find out that she represents Mother Goddess herself in most of the texts. Already there, we have a serious contradiction because we know from other, much more coherent research, that Enki was never married to his mother, the goddess. Hence, we have reasons to believe that either Damkina was not the mother goddess, or Enki was never married to Damkina. There are no convincing records saying that Damkina is not another name for the goddess, so I believe I can say with some confidence that she actually is the goddess. If this being the case, then with whom was Enki married? Of course, we also know that Enki was very promiscuous, so the question can in itself be quite irrelevant. Enki has children everywhere. However, what we are interested in right now is to establish who is the mother of Marduk. There is hardly any doubt that Enki is his father. This is where things become complicated, but to begin, I am going to show to the readers that Inanna, Ishtar, and Isis are all one and the same deity. Hang in there because this will turn out to be very important. Moreover, I want to hypothesize that Horus, whom according to the myth is the son of Osiris, and Isis, is no one other than Marduk himself. Many readers have probably seen the connection over time between Isis and Horus, Ishtar who nurses the god Tammuz, and Mary and Jesus, to name a few. There are more. Those who want to prove that Jesus never existed, Use this as an example. They show that history in fact repeats itself and that the Jesus myth is nothing but the Isis, Horus, and the Ishtar, Tammuz stories all over again. In fact, similar stories are used to manipulate and confuse and control people in the name of religion and cults. By telling a comparable story over time, people get hooked on different belief systems. Usually, there is one basic story that has truth to it, but the rest are just manipulated versions of the first one. My case in point here is that just like the scholar of comparative mythology, Joseph Campbell, I find the Isis, Horus and Ishtar, Tammuz stories identical enough to consider them being one and the same. This means that Isis and Ishtar in that case would be the same deity. Moreover, Ishtar and Inanna are already proven, by scholars, to be one and the same. Ishtar is her name in Babylon, and Inanna is her counterpart in Mesopotamia, Sumer. Then, if the above is true, the fact is that Isis, being the mother of Horus, is also the mother of Marduk because Horus and Marduk are one and the same. Some scholars have already made the connection that all these female deities, Inanna, Ishtar, Lilith, and Isis are identical. Enki in this regard is then, of course, Osiris. There is a reason why I am revealing that Enki and Isis are Marduk's parents. I want to make this entire family connection known because it has a great impact upon the rest of the story. However, there is more, as we writers usually say. Another interesting side note that gets revealed via the above hypothesis is that Isis is also Prince Ninurta's daughter. This becomes obvious because according to the most general ancient records, Ishtar is the daughter of Ninurta, and we just discussed that Ishtar, Inanna, and Isis are all one and the same. I hope I haven't lost the reader now with all these different names for the same deities. Not every star being has multiple names, but in this case, a few of them do, such as Enki and his trolls who have taken on the names of other deities, and changed names and events around as it pleases them, in order to keep the control system going. Also, as noted earlier, a deity almost always had different names in different locations, depending on which time period we're talking about. However, to make things a little less confusing, this is the result of what we have discussed thus far. 1. Enki's consort is said to be Damkana, who is actually the goddess herself, according to most records. Instead, at one point, Isis, Ishtar, Inanna became Enki's consort. 2. From the relationship between Enki, Osiris and Inanna, Ishtar, Isis, Marduk, also known as Horus, was born. According to many ancient records, Isis gave birth to Horus, but as we have noticed, many stories correlate, and instead I suggest that Horus and Marduk are one and the same. Their stories may differ in some regard, but they are still close enough, and the Isis, Marduk connection opens up new doors that were closed before, as the reader is about to find out. 3. Isis, according to the research I'm providing here, is also Ninurta's, Prince Enlil's, daughter. This is actually all there is to it so far, but these 3 points are going to become very significant. Hence, what took some explanation to reveal is showing to be quite simple when we summarize it. The big, happy family is therefore Enki, Isis, and Marduk. Then, from earlier discussions, see paper 2, I have proven beyond doubts that Ninhursag and Mother Goddess are also one and the same, which means that Ninhursag was never helping Enki engineer mankind and had nothing to do with his genetic experiments. In reality, she was strongly against them and considered what Enki did to be a serious crime, and the destruction of her own living library that she and her son, Prince Ninurta, had created to near perfection was not something she looked lightly upon. However, if we exchange Ninhursag with Isis, we are getting much closer to the truth. Thus, we get the expression, Genesis, or the genes of Isis, which, if I recall correctly, was coined by Michael Orion, researcher, but was also used by me as a title of one of my Level I papers. In other words, I am suggesting that Isis was Enki's female partner and master geneticist, and Isis was thus contributing her DNA to the human body, as did Enki. Isis also has connections to the Sirius star system. Isis is often seen wearing a throne on her head, which indicates her royal connection to Sirius. Unbeknownst to many, however, she is also representing Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, the greater and the lesser bear, through her father, Prince Ninurta, and her grandparents, the Queen of Orion and Khan Enlil. Allegedly, it was after her encounters with Enki that she was rewarded the throne of Sirius, as he himself had claimed that domain after some agreements with the locals. However, Isis' bloodline is still that of Orion, through her father, Ninurta. It is still true that we humans have Sirian blood running in our veins, but that is even truer when it comes to the global elite bloodlines, something I will talk more about later. A backdoor into the KHAA. Lord Enki's plan was simple but, in his own eyes, ingenious. He knew that he would never inherit the throne of Orion, regardless of what he was trying to do in order to win the Queen's sympathies, therefore, he had to try any other measures he could think of. His new plan was that if he managed to get Isis as his bride, he would have another foot into the inner sanctuaries of the Orion Empire on her merit, and best of all, she was his brother's daughter. He knew that Ninurta would hate to see him married to her daughter, so that became part of his revenge. He wanted to make sure that everybody knew not to mess with Prince Lucifer. Proud of himself and his brilliant ego, he left for Ursa Minor, where Isis was dwelling at the moment. He found her and spoke with her with his seducing and most charming voice, which he'd been so famous for while he was still Prince Lucifer. The first step of his plan was to manipulate her to come with him to Gaia. He said that he wanted to put things in perspective and explain to her why he thought he'd been treated so badly by the Orion court. He also wanted to show Isis who she really was. His plan worked, and they both went back to Earth. As soon as Enki had the chance, he took Isis aside and brutally raped her. According to Isis herself, at a later account, there was nothing she could do to stop him at that moment. There was no one else around, and she had no crystal or other communication device which she could use to quickly ask for help. She realized that she had been too gullible, but the fact remained, before she knew it, the rape was complete. This rape produced a son, who was later going to become very famous, or infamous rather. The son's name was Marduk. At first, Isis was crushed and didn't know what to do, but Enki consoled her and continued to manipulate her with his soothing voice. He even wrote a poem to her, although the poem was more about Enki's own magnificence. I am not sure how she took that, but ultimately, Enki manipulated her to be what he wanted her to be. This is from Inelma Ellis. My father, ruler above and below, made my features blaze above and below. My great brother, ruler of all the lands, gathered all the me together, placed the me in my hands. From the Eker, house of Enlil, I passed on the arts and crafts to my Abzu, Eridu. I am the true offspring, sprung from the wild ox. I am a leading son of An. I am the great storm that breaks over the great below. I am the great lord over the land. I am the first among the rulers. I am the father of all the lands. I am the big brother of the gods. The haggle is perfected in me. I am the seal keeper above and below. I am cunning and wise in the lands. I am the one who directs justice alongside An, the king, on the days of An. I am the one who, having gazed upon the core, decrees the fates alongside Enlil. He has placed in my hands the decreeing of fates at the place where the sun rises. I am the one Nintur really cares for. I am the one Nintursa gave a good name. I am the leader of the Inanna gods. After seducing and hypnotizing Isis and feeding her with more what's in it for you and what's in it for me, he threw out the punchline. Beautiful lady of the lesser heavens, neither you, nor I, can ever be the ruler of Orion on his or her own, and I think you are born a queen, but not over simple domains such as Sirius, Ursa Major, or Ursa Minor. You deserve the title, Queen of Orion, and I deserve to be king, and you know it. I'm the firstborn, so why did they choose my brother before me? Do you think that's right? Come and marry me, and we will make a strong bloodline. Together we can bypass your father and become the true heirs of Orion. What do you think? Isis looked at Enki and saw his power, or at least the power he seductively emitted toward her, and then looked at her little son, lying in the cradle, and thought that she wanted the best for her son. Hence, she nodded and said yes to Enki's proposal. Enki smiled inside. His plan had been magnificent, indeed. Enki, Isis, and Marduk, thus born here on Earth, now became a family, and Enki had people create a wedding for the two, a wedding, which had to be the most magnificent one in the history of Sector 9, said Enki. Thereafter, the two became one. Later, when Marduk grew up to become a man and a trained Dakh warrior, he was given Alpha Draconis, Thuban, as his domain, as well as Ursa Minor. These were both strategic star systems, and Enki told his son to conquer and expand their domains from there, in the direction toward Orion. Both Alpha Draconis and Ursa Minor were already occupied by star races, but Marduk had a huge amount of well-trained Dakh troops backing him up, and both star systems were taken by surprise and were relatively easily conquered. Ursa Minor and Draco were both Orion domains before Marduk conquered them and made the inhabitants into slaves and Dakh soldiers, with the purpose to expand his armada. Those who refused to follow Marduk were brutally killed and stripped of their avatars, meaning that their souls were doomed. Still, many died a heroic death, a death that was definite, rather than to join the traitor in his army against their own queen and king. Most, however, were too frightened to say no to Marduk. Thus, we have what many call the Dracos, the dragons of Alpha Draconis, and fiery dragons they are, former members of the Orion Empire and in blood tightly connected to the Dragon Queen herself, the Queen of the Stars. Note, there is another hypothesis that Isis was actually one of the ladies of fire in the Garden of Eden, still being Ninurta's daughter. However, Enki knew who she was as soon as he saw her, and raped her right there, and the son she bore from that rape was still Marduk. The two versions have the same outcome, and the only difference is when and where the rape had taken place. For the sake of our continuing story, it doesn't matter which version we subscribe to, the important thing is the rape, which will have, as we will see, some serious consequences. Also, the rape makes Marduk a bastard son. The Miners' Rebellion. After the marriage, there was a long period of peace on Gaia, and Lord Enki expanded his domains to Africa, North America, South America, and Europe. However, before the deluge, his palace stood in Eridu, in ancient Mesopotamia. It should be mentioned here because of its significance that although Enki was in charge of the Stargate of Saturn, it didn't mean that other beings couldn't enter Eridu, our solar system, if they wanted to take the chance. Enki's Dakh warriors were famous for their brutality, and everybody in this part of the universe knew who Lucifer was, and they knew about his brutal rebellion. Hence, very few star beings came past this way. Unfortunately for galactic business, Gaia sat like a plug in the middle of Peshmetan, the intergalactic highway, which many beings from everywhere in the universe who had business in the Milky Way galaxy chose in order to enter and exit the galaxy. This was of course bad business, both for Orion and for other smaller empires in our galaxy. However, all the star races had strict orders from Queen Nin not to interfere with what was happening on Gaia. There were many star species who objected to this. They wanted Lucifer gone from Eridu once and for all, but if someone tried to create a war with Prince Lucifer, it was also seen as a war declaration against Orion, which no one wanted. The reason for the Orion Queen to act like this was that she knew her son, and he had often showed the same pattern. If someone threatened him, and he saw that he was outnumbered, he would use the existing humans on Gaia as a shield and threaten to kill them if someone attacked. This was also the main reason why the Orion Empire, which otherwise could defeat Enki quite easily, didn't interfere. If they did, it would be the end of the Mother Goddess's experiment. At that time, before the flood, she was still thinking about other ways to get Lucifer out of there. On Gaia, the miners, especially in Africa and in South America, started complaining about long working hours and how badly they were treated. After all, they were Enki's people. Why did he treat them so cruelly? They hardly ever saw the light of day, and long hours in the mines wore them down. After a long time of accepting their situation, one day they rebelled. Enki didn't see it coming and was not really prepared, so the rebellion took a while to get under control, and many of the AIF workers died in the process. The mining crew was now quite reduced, and Enki needed more workers. Sitchin and others claimed that it was Enlil who was the tyrant who treated the miners badly, but this is not true. Enlil was not even on Earth at that time. Both Khan Enlil and Prince Enlil had business elsewhere. As we know, Enki had now determined who were dwelling on the other side of the mountains in the east. Hence, his next step was to find out how many ladies of fire were hiding in that domain. He already had a plan how to get in there without using force. How Enki did it is also written into our own mythology, so I am going to tell the story based both on mythology and then from a more direct viewpoint, which explains exactly what happened. Rape and manipulation in the Garden of Eden.
For the rest of the reading, simply go to my previous video that is titled Rape of a Lady of Fire, thus Genetic Manipulation in the Garden of Eden by Enki. I will put, of course, the link in the video description as well as in cards. And I will add that this video, at the end of the document, at the end of the video, it's made by, it's an excerpt from Karen Last that is titled Only One Key. I just took a little part of it because it matches very well with the story that West Penre is telling us here. Thank you for listening. While I'm at it, I should add it's an excerpt from Ancient Alien DNA Reveals Human Alien Hybrids, Season 7. Again, it is only an excerpt. Now I'm not sure concerning the copyright. If the copyright will be added, then it would block the video from all over the place except me, so I will have to remove it. So please understand, I'm only trying this because it fits very well with everything that is said from West Penre and also Karen Lass. Thank you for your understanding.
Could it be that our ancestors are not only hominids who lived here on Earth, but also beings from beyond our world? Ancient astronaut theorists claim that evidence of this can be found in stories throughout history that depict humans mating with gods.
Throughout world cultures and mythologies, this idea of otherworldly beings, gods, supernatural beings, demons, having sex with humans is very, very common. The way that we interpret that experience depends on the cultural and religious factors around us.
We can read about these accounts of all sorts of weird beings who had their way with humans. All we have to do is to approach these stories and look at them from a modern perspective, to eliminate the always suggested symbolism and look at these events for what they potentially really were: encounters with extraterrestrials.
There is abundant, undeniable evidence of human and extraterrestrial interbreeding. It's in so many different cultures that to suggest that it's all a conspiracy theory or a myth or a fantasy is completely illogical.
Is indeed a very high price to be paid for this thing called sin, or sexual pleasure. And just as humans have sex, so too does this artificial god. Its harvest being of a sexual nature, whereby the twin towers of its 9/11 call bring its measurement mature semen into the sea. The 9/11 emerge in sea call of the age, the climax and summit of the false crown. The false crown that is always looking to succeed after the bin is full. If one wants to type in their LOL upon hearing this, feel free. That's why this is a divine comedy. Again, all of eternity hears your mocking laugh and declarations. The fact is, the user truly is the used. No one gets to have that sexual orgasm without an ultimate price being paid. This really is a circus, and this place uses us as its artificial circuits. We are all the relays running on our short little track before passing the torch onto the next generation. The circuit monkeys in the circus. Our father and mother have the entire vision, and their timing is perfect. This is why none of this can be done too soon or too late. This is why even this message could not be brought forward too soon or too late. They understand the difficulty of what we are facing and being asked of far more than even any of us can. This curse we suffer is horrendous. It brings along with it all that is terrible: fear, worry, anxiety, depression, loneliness, despair, and pain. None of that is the truth. It is all only made possible by the lie. It is of critical importance that one carefully weighs out all that is being brought forth. Consider it deeply and know that very few are being given the advanced sight of what is to come. How many have made multitudes of claims before in regards to this period in time? The final days, to put it bluntly. So often those making these claims are always ready to sell you something, ready to take advantage of everyone in some form or another. Nothing is being sold here, and nothing is being asked of anyone. The truth and the spirit is not for sale. The truth and the spirit cannot be bought or sold. It is not something to be marketed. What a blasphemy to attempt to do so. A message is being presented, one in which this speaker is following to the letter. It is up to every individual listening whether they want to take the message serious or to dismiss it. There is no judgment either way. Look around. Sit in silence. Meditate deeply on everything that you have been shown. Observe how the earth is being treated like an enemy, like a piece of trash, tossing the whole of creation into the garbage and flushing the rest down the toilet. Does one not ask what is giving the earth constant life? What is bringing forth all of the abundance over and over again? Does one not realize that it's the spirit doing all of that? Look at the direction of this false vision. Everyone is consuming everything. If there was never a stop put to it at any point, what would the inevitable result be? Be honest. Look at the truth for exactly what it is. This is why eternity is always asking, where is the heart? Where is the heart? Observe what nearly everyone is focusing on, putting their entire being into watching the increasingly absurd drama unfold, and not giving a moment of consideration to the very foundation which makes absolutely everything possible. Without the earth, which is the heart, none of us have anything. Those deeply entrenched in the influence of the influenza mock this as being an elitist type of Gaia worship. Does it appear in any way that the forces controlling things care in the slightest about the earth? They talk and talk and talk about the need to save the planet while simultaneously destroying it with feverish delight, having everyone help them to do it with ever greater efficiency. There is this deeply rooted notion that once something gets to be too big, it becomes too big to fail. This notion is incredibly flawed and baseless. The entire structure of this place is founded upon an erroneous design, and as it builds itself upwards, the flaws of that design become more and more evident. One mistake leads to another ad infinitum, and inevitably the whole thing crumbles under the weight of its own errors. It is a house of cards, because that is its deal. It deals from its deck of cards and makes its divisions and cuts to build its casino house and play its demented games. It mocks our true creators and has the multitudes believing that they need to do the same. Save this house of mockery and its merciless ruler. One's petty desires of maintaining this enormously flawed composition, however, do nothing to sway the power of inconceivable forces. It is the spirit which provides everything, and one's ignorance of this does not negate the fact of it. Right now is the last call for the spirit before our eternal mother shuts off the taps, and there is then a realization for everyone of the consequences of treating the magic which everyone so callously ignores as if it's just there to serve us endlessly, to destroy it all, to play this sick and twisted hierarchical game. This empire is a joke that has gotten very old again, its sense of humor entirely dried up, dry as a desert, heartless. This heart does not believe in a stitch of this game's vision, not one stitch. To believe in it at all is to believe in a blind, despotic, and false god. You need to seriously ask yourself if you believe in any of it. Some of you have been more concerned with the spacing of these works, instead of being extremely concerned about the space within yourself. Look around. Sit in silence. Meditate deeply on everything that you have been shown. Everyone is going to have to make the biggest choice ever, whether they want to or not. In a war, there are always many casualties, and this war is no different. Every single one of us becomes a casualty to this place, and it wants you to believe that this is just part of the grand schematic of how things are supposed to be. It wants you to identify with that suit that you see in the mirror. And once you identify that you are that suit in any way, it has you. When you identify and attach yourself to its construct, you must follow its vision all the way through. You want to believe that that flesh suit you are wearing is you in any way? All right then, see you in 100 years. You have to carry the vision you believe in all the way through. Still want to believe that's you? Still want to attach yourself to it at all? Belief is vision, and your vision carries more impact and consequence than can be imagined. There are hidden price tags everywhere, and just because one doesn't see or acknowledge them does not mean they are not there. There is still much more to discuss, but it's going to be put forth in the final revelation just how serious this heart is about all of this. This is not a joke, and it is not a metaphor. This heart is all in, and is going to be walking through hell with or without anyone else. A definitive and actual walk that will inevitably be seen by the entire world. Anyone can mock and ridicule this all they want, for blindness has no idea of the force that they treat with contempt. Everyone is going to have their 20/20 glasses put on at some point, sooner or later. This heart is ready to die for anyone and everyone who will be walking with him on the thin gate towards the correct vision. In a war, one must be ready to die, to put it all on the line. It was asked what the price one was willing to pay to know what it takes to attain freedom. Many others over the years have stated that this is a war in different ways, but has the significance of that and its implication really sunk in? One must become the truth, and to believe in the vision of truth is to know that the truth does not die. As it has been said, talk is cheap. One must walk their talk. Only one key into the kingdom. Only one key.